This is the story of women and their influence in the communications world. There was an air of excitement in 1909 in the office of the Daily Wave when journalism professor Merle Thorpe offered his 7 women students the opportunity to publish a women's edition of the University of Washington campus newspaper. Helen Ross was the editor. Georgina McDougall and Helen Graves were assistant editors for this historic edition. The editing experience was the spark that inspired Georgina McDougall to consider starting a women's journalism fraternity. She and Helen Ross took their idea to Blanche Brace, Helen Graves, Rachel Marshall, Olive Merriman, and Irene Somerville, and together the students formed the Alpha chapter of Theta Sigma Phi. The December 11th headline in the Daily announced, "Women form honor sorority in journalism, is first sorority of the kind." The mission of the Theta Sigma Phi was to raise the standards of journalism, improve working conditions for women in the profession, and to inspire the individual to greater efforts. The only member with a typewriter, Helen Ross, wrote the initiation ceremonies, pledge, constitutions, and bylaws. Correspondence went out to other universities with journalism departments, inviting them to charter a chapter. By 1910, Beta chapter of Theta Sigma Phi was granted a charter at the University of Wisconsin. This marked the beginning of the National Campus Organization. To symbolize their mission, the group adopted a matrix insignia. The image was a reproduction of the pen worn by Professor Thorpe. The shape represented the matrix of a linotype machine. Greek letters and torch were added to make the official Theta Sigma Phi pen. The Matrix became the name for the official publication of the organization. The Matrix, Volume 1, Number 1, published in 1915, opened with a message from Ida M. Tarbell, well-respected female journalist, who urged Matrix readers to learn to write. No journalist goes far who does not appreciate the value of good writing. With 8 chapters, Theta Sigma Phi elected national officers and began to plan its first convention for 1916 in Kansas. When the United States entered World War I, the convention was canceled. Newspapers called on women journalists to step into jobs left as men were called to military duty. Several experienced reporters were accredited by the War Department to be war correspondents. Theta Sig's best-known correspondent was Rita Child Dorr, whose articles on the Russian Revolution were front-page news in the New York Evening Mail for weeks. The war ended, and in 1918, the National Convention was rescheduled in Lawrence, Kansas. The delegates moved to establish an employment bureau and to call for the appointment of women to teach journalism in colleges. The decade ended with the founding of the first alumni chapter of the Theta Sigma Phi in Kansas City. Professional member journalists and writers voted to develop a formal alumni organization at the 1920 national meeting. The Matrix carried stories about a woman writer's role in the post-war economic slump. It noted that women no longer were working, quote, as a novelty, as a social reformer, or as hatchet women for freedom, but out of economic necessity and ambition. In the fall of 1926, delegates to the National Convention finalized plans for an employment bureau for members to be called the Women's National Journalistic Register. The goal was to aid women journalists in finding jobs that reported hard news, not just working the society pages. Journalists like Hannah Mitchell, New York Tribune correspondent in Washington, D.C., and Ruth Finney, city editor for Scripps Howard newspapers, were early women recognized for their news-writing talents. The success of the Journalistic Register was reported in a late 20s Matrix edition as a 200% increase in placing women in journalism jobs. Pi Chapter at the University of Illinois is credited with staging the first Matrix table to honor women of achievement in their community, as well as respected campus and faculty women. Sinclair Lewis was the first featured speaker. The event was so successful that other chapters picked up the idea, and over the years, the Matrix table became a tradition.
It was a great idea, and it was done in the spring, and it matched the time when it was founded, and it just grew and grew across the country.
Real progress in journalism education saw more than 50 schools educating students to take jobs in newspapers and magazines. Members of the 1929 National Convention heard Ruth Hill Zimmerman say, just as the first 20 years of the fraternity's life held advancements for women in the profession of journalism almost undreamed of in the opening years of the century, so it is probable that the decades ahead will bring new opportunities and triumphs unforeseen today. For this advance, Theta Sigma Phi is prepared for leadership and service. The effect of the stock market crash and the shrinking job market saw a resurfacing of prejudice against women applying for jobs on newspapers and magazines. The Matrix focused on opportunities for the Depression graduate, with stories on working for no pay, creating their own jobs, or starting their own businesses. In the 1930s, women journalists found new job opportunities in the emerging medium of radio. Marion Thornton noted in 1934, if this sort of thing keeps up, there'll soon be a diminutive microphone added to every Theta Sigma Phi pledge ribbon. The new Roosevelt administration made an effort to help female journalists when First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt closed her weekly press conference to men. Mrs. Roosevelt was made an honorary member and later wrote for the Matrix, "I consider the opportunity for women in the field of communications is almost limitless." The National Council authorized alumni chapters to shift away from literary meetings to vocational subjects. Experienced members led seminars on publicity, advertising, and creative writing. Successful members were blazing new trails in their fields. Detroit Times reporter Vera Brown learned to fly for a story she was writing and then used her skills to cover stories in the Midwest. The image of Betty Goodwin was seen on the first NBC TV tests, and she became a regular announcer for the New York 1936 tests. National Theta Sig President Gladys Whitley Hearst urged members to become better journalists by continuing their studies through their whole lives. To mark career accomplishments by members, the fraternity named their first Headliners Award recipients. Fiction writers Lois Seister Montrose, Thelma Straybell Godwin, and Martha Chevin Shuck were selected for their accomplishments in communications and continued excellence in their field. The status of women was the theme for the 1940 National Convention held in Columbus, Ohio. Helen Robbins of the National Women's Party warned members, "Unless we stand together, we'll be fired separately." When the United States entered World War II, it brought a huge change in the status of women journalists. Opportunities for women in print and broadcast journalism opened again as men went overseas to war. Helen Kirkpatrick was an award-winning foreign correspondent for the Chicago Daily News. Life magazine photojournalist Margaret Burke White was the first woman correspondent accredited to the Army Air Force. She photographed landings in North Africa and Italy. Other members were commissioned military officers like Catherine Stull, who served as a public information officer assigned to the Far East Command. After the Japanese surrender, Stull escorted Tokyo Rose back to San Francisco to face trial. At home, Theta Sigma Phi chapters organized into emergency units under the Civilian Defense Director. Members were asked to put their talents as journalists and publicists to work for the war effort. They established news bureaus at USO clubs and sent stories about soldiers to their hometown papers. When wartime travel restrictions were lifted in 1946, a national convention was planned in Chicago. Discussions centered on the enhancement of the place of women in journalism and a review of standards of quality and professional integrity for members. Chapters were advised to eliminate any race restrictions in their bylaws. With this new post-war emphasis on professionalism, Theta Sigma Phi grew to 47 student and 29 alumni groups by 1950. Elizabeth Fontaine introduced the delegates to the Hospitalized Veterans Writing Project. Members like poet Annabelle Armour volunteered to act as writers' aides to veterans in hospitals across the country. Cash prizes were given for veterans' journalistic efforts. In 1950, the communist North Koreans crossed the 49th parallel and sparked the Korean War.
In the absence of Soviet obstruction, the Security Council voted overwhelmingly in favor of armed intervention to protect the Korean Republic. It was the first police action sanctioned against an aggressor by the Parliament of Nations.
New York Herald Tribune Tokyo Bureau Chief Marguerite Higgins saw the invasion of Korea and wrote eyewitness accounts back to her readers. May Craig was back in uniform and traveling by Navy carrier jet to cover the news about this Asian conflict. A new war spurred Theta Sig President Marie Margaret Winthrop to call for a global view of the world. Improved communications with our neighbors at home and abroad was vital to better world understanding, according to Winthrop. With this as an organizational goal, membership tours were planned to destinations like South America, Pakistan, Western Europe, and Japan. The Matrix carried stories and photographs of these goodwill tours. The fact that more than 80 members were living and working abroad led the group to form Theta Sigma Phi International under the leadership of Beryl Rothschild in Tokyo. International member Helen Yu of Taiwan's largest English language daily was featured in a Matrix profile on women overseas journalists. Back home, new career opportunities were opening to women in radio and television. Newspaper society pages gave way to women's sections with tips on how to manage a career and a family. Women writers like Peg Gamage found industrial journalism a challenge. Working for the Kodak Company, Peg developed stories on new technology as well as business information. United Press sports writer Fay Lloyd moved into the all-male sports press box when she covered the Cotton Bowl in 1955. Her editor, Leo Peterson, noted she has everything: beauty, brains, a good news background, and a love of sports. A grand celebration for the 1959 golden anniversary of Theta Sigma Phi brought members back to Alpha Chapter at the University of Washington. The Pacific Rim was the theme for this national convention. 3 founding members, Blanche Brace, Irene Somerville, and Georgina McDougall Davis, passed the torch to the next generation with these words: "From your strength and progress will come our great honor." Journalists like Esther Van Wagener Tufte, Martha Crane, and Irma Bombeck found their audiences in broadcast. Jacqueline Cochran, the first woman pilot to fly faster than sound in this F-38, invited her fellow Theta Sigs to get ready for space travel. She predicted, "A man will go to the moon in my lifetime, and that women will be partners in this race to conquer space." Journalism in the space age was introduced at the 1963 National Convention with demonstrations of computer typesetting and news transmission by satellite. A special Telstar satellite connection let delegates talk with members in London.
I became president, went to the national meeting that was in Detroit, and in Detroit I found the organization nationally was what I thought it was going to be locally. And then I went back home as president of the chapter and started trying to organize to get different activities going on, and the chapter became quite active for a long time. Now that meeting in Detroit in 1967, I haven't missed a national meeting since.
Reports on racial issues in the late 60s were featured in the Matrix. Ebony editor Ponchetta Pierce posed the question, quote, "Negro news, why isn't more on the women's pages?" Members in Los Angeles and Ann Arbor chapters reported special efforts to bridge the black and white communications gap. Theta Sigma Phi journalists were called again to report on a war, this time in Vietnam. Marguerite Higgins made several trips to Vietnam for Newsday. Esther Van Wagner Tufte picked up her war correspondence notebook again to cover the Indochina conflict. Broadcast journalist Marlene Sanders reported for ABC News.
It's hard to say how much my little stint in Vietnam changed anything, except the networks at that time felt that all of their major correspondents should put in time in Vietnam. They came and said, would I do it? But they wanted their main correspondents to do this, and frankly, it was the major story of the day.
When President Nixon made his landmark trip to China in 1972, Helen Thomas was the only woman reporter in the press delegation.
We knew nothing about China in the new China, that is. It was a great experience to be on that trip, a breakthrough trip, breakthrough for Nixon as well, and for our country, and we have had better relations ever since.
The political climate of the country revealed the growing call for women's rights, and Theta Sigma Phi chapters debated their role in the feminist movement. Years of working to be recognized as journalists, not women journalists, made members reluctant to join the movement. After thoughtful deliberation, the organization joined the Equal Rights Coalition. Women's rights became the paramount challenge of the 1970s. Theta Sigma Phi members found that their organization's Greek fraternity name limited their acceptance as a professional organization. At the 1972 National Conference, members voted to change their name to Women in Communications Incorporated, called WICI. Founding members Georgina McDougall Davis and Irene Durham sent their approval of the change, saying the original concepts for the society still held strong and true. Delegates also voted to admit men to full membership. The first men to become WICI members were Pioneer Public Relations Executive Edward Bernays, ABC Television President Walter Schwartz, McCann Erickson Chairman Robert Marker, Ladies Home Journal Editor John Mack Carter, and Gannett Newspapers President Alan Newharth. These new members went on to lead projects for equal rights. The Clarion Awards were established by Women in Communications to recognize excellence in all fields of communications, provide incentive for further achievement, and demonstrate the role of communication in dealing with current issues. Carol Howard, Vice President of Reader's Digest, was the first honoree.
The Clarions is for clear and concise communication, and that's what they're judged on. We have 130 categories within the Clarion Awards. I think it's important that AWC give out the Clarion Award because we are still the only predominantly women's organization that crosses all communications disciplines.
Members writing for the Matrix reflected the challenges facing the newly named Women in Communications. Political violence on campus, civil rights marches, computer technology in newsrooms, and communications law were all stories covered in the publication. The Nixon administration's hostile view of the news media brought renewed concern for the importance of freedom of information. WICI joined with 11 other communications organizations to found the First Amendment Congress and worked to preserve these constitutional rights. Chapters presented programs to alert members to First Amendment violations. In 1972, WICI sent a national survey to 170 colleges asking about the status of women journalism faculty members. The survey revealed that 90 journalism schools had no women on their faculties. At that year's national conference, an affirmative action resolution was passed, and by the end of the decade, a dramatic increase in women faculty members was reported. With a renewed interest in political affairs, WICI opened an office in Washington, D.C. in 1980. Louise Ott was hired to monitor women's issues and represent the views of the organization on pending legislation. The Equal Rights Amendment campaign got support from local chapters that raised money to keep the amendment before the public.
We never questioned that we wouldn't take a stand for the Equal Rights Amendment, that we wouldn't take a stand for equal pay for equal work. All these women's issues were building in the 70s and 80s and the early 90s. We were living that revolution, and we were absolutely toe-to-toe with other women's organizations at the Capitol and in our states and locally. It was a very exciting time, and we were seen as one of the players with all of them.
To focus attention on the amendment, the 1981 National Conference featured a family of Americans for the ERA house. The display featured a home with planks that named the ratified states. After many years of support by the organization, the ERA fell 3 states short of the ratification goal and was not added to the Constitution. Chapters developed mentoring programs with student chapters in an effort to extend the legacy of communications excellence to the next generation of young women.
I personally think one of the best things that young women can do are to be mentored by women who have been around a while. It's most helpful.
For 7 decades, the Women in Communications publication, The Matrix, featured fine writing by members. In 1985, the Professional Communicator became the official WICI publication. Writing in the From the Top column, National President Denise Gray called for greater organization focus on the First Amendment, pay equity, and civil rights. The learning experience gained through college internships sparked a 1980 WICI survey. As a result, guidelines were developed for colleges and employers to establish quality internships.
I did a survey at the beginning, and women in the early 80s, so as soon as I came into the journal, and women said they did not want to live like their mothers. They wanted opportunities and were grateful that they now had new opportunities.
The 75th Anniversary Conference returned to Seattle in 1984 with the theme, Striving for Excellence. President Susan Chilcott urged members to face the challenges the future holds for them as professional women and as communicators. That year, WICI reported 12,000 members in 180 professional and student chapters. Leading change was the mission statement adopted by the 1988 Board of Directors. The experience revitalized the leadership and spread throughout the organization. The 1990s WICI job and salary surveys revealed that women in the workforce had record low pay scales. The Equal Pay Act was widely supported by WICI members. Stop Sexual Harassment was a nationwide print media campaign spearheaded by WICI, 24 magazine publishers, newspapers, and capital cities ABC. Full-page ads ran for a year designed to increase awareness in the business community. The web played an increasingly important role in WICI when national headquarters and 3 chapters went online in the mid-90s. Military conflicts in Panama and the Persian Gulf saw women in combat for the first time. Broadcast journalist Susan McKenzie reported on both conflicts while she was with the U.S. Army. In 1994, the Fundamentals for the Future Task Force was formed under the leadership of Christy Bulkeley to evaluate the changing role for women in communications. This study showed the need to adopt a structure modeled on other successful modern professional associations. At the annual meeting in Portland in 1996, delegates voted to dissolve WICI and formed the Association for Women in Communications using this new model.
When the organization was going through a change in 1996, the group that I was involved with from this area voted me to be a part of the new interim board of directors for Women in Communications.
A new board was elected with Lynn Osborne as interim chair, and Pat Troy's management firm was hired to oversee the new AWC office. As an important step in rebuilding the organization, Twin Cities chapter volunteered to host the 1997 annual professional conference with Patty Miller as chair. A 5-year plan to return the association to its roots as a highly visible and influential organization devoted to the advancement of women in communications was presented to the conference. By 1998, AWC had 60 professional chapters, 90 student chapters, and independent members in the U.S. and overseas. The Matrix Foundation, the educational affiliate of AWC, was established in 1998 to promote the advancement of women in communications through education, research, and publications.
Because I served on the National Board of Directors for Women in Communications, I really understood the organization and its needs, and so could help through the foundation to provide some of the not-for-profit needs, such as scholarships, research, and publications that would help both AWC and its membership.
Fundraising by local AWC chapters provide higher education scholarships for young women studying communications.
I applied for the AWC scholarship because I really believe in the organization, and I would really love to have support for them in achieving my academic and professional goals.
The organization updated the Matrix tradition of publishing information for career women communicators when it went online with Intercom and later the Communique. Electronic networking, membership directory, a job bank database, and chapter leaders' guides were all part of the mission to position AWC members at the forefront of the evolving communications era. Professional competence and leadership skills are the basis for the AWC Matrix Foundation Certification Program. Members can earn a Certificate of Communications Excellence designed to move them up the ladder of success in their communications field.
What I found out through the certification program was that I had much more experience and many more capabilities than I really had realized. It was kind of a self-awakening as to what my capabilities and what my skills were, and that was a bonus that I really hadn't counted on.
In the 21st century, members continue to gather for national conferences where they attend professional seminars, find opportunities to debate issues, and network. Conferences are also a time to recognize outstanding women communicators with awards. The Headliner Award has honored more than 200 distinguished AWC professional members since 1939. Honorees are selected each year for their accomplishments and continued excellence in their field of communications. The International Matrix Award is given to a communications professional for achieving the highest level of professional excellence. The honoree headlines the National Awards Dinner. Other AWC National Awards spotlight the Rising Star and Outstanding Student Chapters and faculty advisors. Rising Star Amanda Jane Hofstetter notes,
"It was a dream come true. It truly was a dream come true, and I made connections that I would have never made ever without AWC.
The Hall of Fame recognizes a professional communicator for the highest professional and ethical standard and original contributions to her field. Helen Thomas, first woman dean of the Washington Press Corps, was named to the Hall of Fame in 2007. Thomas was honored as White House correspondent covering 6 presidents.
I feel very privileged to be in journalism, and I've started out in high school, in fact. When I saw my byline the first time, my ego swelled, and I decided this is it. And I'm so glad that I picked a profession which can be so rewarding, and I tell myself that I'm making a difference, because I do think you have to have an informed people.
Stimulating and informative chapter meetings explore new technology and develop skills. Members enjoy opportunities for networking. Outstanding communicators lead seminars. AWC assists members in building their career paths and staying current with local and national trends.
I really believe in the concept of women helping women. The mission of AWC embodied everything that I was looking for in a professional organization.
I would certainly not have become an editor and a publisher in Gannett if I hadn't had some contacts that I made through Women in Communication.
I've always considered it a lifeline. I don't think that I could have achieved what I did achieve if it hadn't been for that organization.
I'm proud of the organization because it hasn't really strayed from its First Amendment roots. I really believe that they are still carrying on that mission.
Well, AWC has certainly been a thread that's run through my life, especially, as I said, during that period when I was raising children. They were the people who kept me up to date in my job and who hired me.
As a new college graduate, it was definitely the most affordable organization, and I also thought that I got the most bang for my buck in the fact that I was able to network with not only women in the public relations field, but women from all realms of communications.
The benefits to being a part of AWC are the friendships you make with women who are working in other phases of communication. It broadens one's knowledge and makes you appreciate how it all fits together.
How will AWC evolve in the second 100 years?
Women in Communications has been evolving over the years and constantly changing, and I think that's been one of our strengths, is that we can evolve and change. The organization, I think, is poised to respond to that and to be on the forefront of whatever the next thing is in communications.
I'd like to see us continue that growth as far as being a leader in communications technology and educating our members and preparing them to do the best in their field, because that's what we all need in these challenging times.
We work so hard at AWC to make sure that we're all going to be on the right path, that I see a very bright future for us.
I think Women in Communications is absolutely relevant today. It really keeps people like myself informed of not only what's in the business now, but what's ahead.
The biggest thing that I think will keep AWC going is the people. It's the membership of AWC that is the heart of AWC.
I'd like to congratulate the Women in Communications on their 100th anniversary. I think that they've come a long way, and they've really proved that women can do anything.